Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to our show today. Today is Sunday and we are live at 11 a.m.
So welcome back, brothers and sisters. We hope you guys are having a great day. Like any other day, Sundays usually are a family day. It's our rest day here in the West. But for those that are working, that are watching us, we still would like to, tell you that, just keep on doing what you are doing. This is just kind of part of life and how we have to proceed with our day-to-day living and our lifestyle that we have here in America. So I hope you guys are doing well, brothers and sisters. So before we get started with our program, Lamba John and I, we're going to go ahead and discuss a little bit about the importance of the mass convention that took place last weekend.
Yeah, and it feels like it was so long ago. I'm kind of surprised to even hear that, sentence of last weekend. So this is something I already mentioned previously, but Mass Convention of 2019 was actually the first Mass Convention I have ever attended.
Okay.
And I was very surprised by the kind of turnaround that I saw with the speakers, with the youth, and the community members coming in. I think we had definitely over 2,000 people at Mass Convention this year.
Definitely. It was about 2,000 to 3,000 people that show up on an annual basis.
It happens
every year.
SubhanAllah, it was such a rainy weekend, and it was in Ontario, and so there was a lot of traffic. It was Thanksgiving break, and yet so many people showed up, and that in itself was so beautiful to see that, no barrier is going to stop people from actually attending these conferences and these workshops.
And it was great because if you look at it, brothers and sisters, on our screen, we have a video of myself, and then we have Lamba John as well on the stage, and then we had Dr. Marwa Azab and Sheikh Sohail Mullah, who were also some of the panelists on the show and on the program. So what we did was we discussed the importance of mental health, just so people are aware of mental health in physical, mental, spiritual, and we also discussed the importance of nutrition and how that affects food affects your body as well. And it was great because one thing that actually really surprised me, there was a lot of Afghans too.
Yeah.
I got a lot of Afghans who actually came up to us and who were very happy to see us. And I think it's very important that, and one of the things that I realized, there's so many Afghans, even at the Mass Convention, the brother who actually is the executive director for the LA chapter is Brother Purmul. And people the Afghans didn't even know he was from Afghanistan. And I think that has to do with some of our featuristics. As Afghans, we do look different, a little different in every aspect.
And as well as language, because majority of the conference at Mass was done in English. There were opportunities to do it in native languages, but just to attract the bigger and larger audience and not focus it on just like the native, audiences and tribes. Most of the workshops were in English to attract more people.
They did. And one of the greatest things that we realized this year, Lamba John and I, was that they've had seminars specifically geared towards a specific language. So you had folks who spoke Arabic, and then they had a topic in Arabic, Spanish, Turkish. And there was a couple of more, and I think next year I talked to the folks that are running it, and I told them for next year we would like to have a Pashto and a Dari seminar.
Nice.
So inshallah we'll try to do that. So if you guys are ever in Ontario, we had a lot of folks who actually flew down from other states and from other places, even from NordCal, to attend this event. This is a great family event. A lot of people come in. They have a separate program for the children. They have a separate program for the youth, for the parents. It's like a family festival. They have a bazaar there.
And then you also learn about, different agencies that are available, whether it's you want to donate money, doing zakat, finding medical help. I know Genesis Medical Center was a center that was there that was, kind of educating the community about, different kind of activities that they have and different services that they have for people to request and get more information about. So I think Mass and all just kind of covered many areas, whether it was social, physical, biomedical, and then again the benefit of having the bazaar and being able to acquire things that are really hard to acquire living in in the US.
Definitely. And I think one of the greatest things is that from this from today, what we're going to do is hopefully sometimes next week we'll display our talk that we played on the screen. That was like a 40-minute video, and we will go ahead and share that with you guys, but on another day. So today, coming here, we have a specific topic that we want to share with you guys, brothers and sisters. So this topic has come, this topic has been a pretty prominent topic here in the West for a long period of time. And I've been talking to a couple of the imams lately as well, and they have also had the same issues when it comes to marriage. So we realized that there is a big issue in marriages that are taking place here in America. And one of those difficulties or challenges that we realize is that a lot of community members or a lot of the Muslims in today's world are not, aligned in having the same goals. And I think what we want to do is we want to talk about the importance of premarital counseling. And then we also want to talk about, tips on how to have a, sustainable and how to have a marriage that is aligned amongst the two partners and also amongst the two families, depending on how involved they are in a healthy way in the community. So this talk today for brothers and sisters, for those that are watching us, you guys have to realize that this talk is going to be specifically geared towards the Muslims in America. That's all, because we know the surrounding here, so we want to go ahead and address this especially for those Muslims who live in America, not Afghans or Muslims out in their own country in Egypt and Afghanistan and Pakistan. This is not going to be for you because there's different cultural expectations. There's also different legal systems of how a system works. So what we realized and what we have come to understand that in America there's a specific form of system and a specific way a person or a family or a community lives and they operate. Every community is different in their own ways. And that is why we want to go ahead and discuss the importance of premarital counseling here in America only. So please do remember that this talk is only specifically geared towards those that are living in America. So I don't want you guys going back and saying, well, this is wrong, this is not our belief. That is true. There's going to be certain things that are, that I probably don't even like, but, in a marriage, when it comes to being in America, there's certain things that you have to change because now you're coming to a different place where you have to recreate a culture by having your culture and by, let's say, having your spouse's culture, the culture of your external family, your family, your parents, your brothers and your sister. Everything has to be mixed in. And once you have a child, remember, now you have to do what you can for the child now going forward. So I know I'm saying a lot, just
I think
the viewers are
I think what
fully
you're
understanding of it.
I think what you're mentioning is actually really important because we have to look at the context of society that we're residing in when we discuss these different topics. And marriage is one that, can either trigger a lot of people or make a lot of people feel connected to the topic. And so it's important to discuss, what context are we talking about? Are we talking about in the context of living in Afghanistan as we discuss the problems that arise? Or are we talking about living in the U.S.? Yeah. Because when we look at these two different countries, marriages, people who get married or about to get married, they might have completely different problems. In Afghanistan, it might be something simpler, like, just like finances, getting prepared for a wedding and pay for the costs, versus in the U.S. it could be a completely different issue. So it's important discussing, what context are we looking at, and within that context, what kind of problems can arise.
Sure.
So definitely. I thank you for actually starting the topic off with that disclaimer. Yeah,
because it can become problematic later, and this has people. I don't want people misinterpreting our work. And not just that, but also misinterpreting it to each other or their family or the community. So that's why it's very important for us to come in and put this disclaimer for you guys that this topic and this discussion will be geared towards those that are living in America only. Yeah. That's it. So don't. You can try to use it in your country, in your own place. It might not work because it's different. I live here in America, and for me, as a Muslim, as an Afghan, and as an Afghan-American, how do you combine all of that together, right? It's very different in different countries. It's not. I have a lot of people, a lot of folks that are newly Afghans that have come to America, and when I sit with them, they look at me strangely with
Sure.
certain things that I do and certain habits that I have.
Right.
And I too look at them very strangely.
Yeah. Well, and that makes sense
So
because
it's different form of
you
it.
you look at the values that are placed in those individuals, right? So the context that we live in, the environment that we live in, that culture impacts our values, our, way of thinking, our style of living. And so it makes sense for, two different people from two different contexts to come together and feel like, not like question each other's ways because it's unnatural to them because that's not how they grew up.
Definitely,
right?
definitely.
So you mentioned something really important, which was, we have spoken to imams about this topic, trying to look at, what are the problems that they see in, couples getting together, getting married a few years down the road. We've also done a lot of research on this topic as well, trying to look at what research has said about areas of problems that arise in the earlier years of the marriage, as well as we, conduct therapy ourselves, so we get tons of clients and couples coming in and telling us problems that arose either before marriage, post marriage. And so we kind of wanted to combine all those topics together and focus on, hey, what are some of the things you should talk to your future spouse before you get married?
Yeah, and again, like Lamba John stated right now, these are elements that we've been educated in.
Mm-hmm.
We don't come out and we just say these things and bluff it. We say this because we're educators. Lamba John is a doctoral student. I'm in my doctorate program. So alhamdulillah, in a year or two we'll finish up with our doctorate degrees. So this is a credible, we're credible sources. We're not just saying this just to say it just because. We don't do that. The second thing is that we are therapists, so we get families and individuals and couples who come to us.
Mm-hmm.
When they come to us, we sit them down and we talk about the problems that they're going through.
Mm-hmm.
And number three, personal experience. Lamba John and I, we've been married for a while, and we have personal experience that we can share, and then also discuss the importance of other Muslims and Afghans that are around us. And it's really the same commonalities that people are going through.
Mm-hmm.
So today, what we are discussing and what we're going to talk about is tips that that we've seen and that we have utilized in couples that have made a successful marriage, if they implement it. So the couples are willing to implement this, but this might not hit home for the community or sometimes like their parents, the older generation.
Sure.
So here we have to realize and we have to understand that anybody who's younger than 40, 45, they have an easier time understanding the concept of marital or premarital counseling.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody who's over this, they don't like the change.
Well,
so this is where we have to also respect their values, but we have to do it in a way where we always tell the couples, you have to be the person to talk to your family.
Right.
You have to be the one to talk to your elders, because for them, they grew up in a system that was already placed. So I'll give you a perfect example. Anywhere that I go, right, people are looking at me and they tell me, why don't you have kids? You've been married for a couple of years now. And I tell them, we don't want to have kids at the moment. We're busy. We don't have time. So for them, when they got married, their job was to have kids the following year.
Mm-hmm. There was no
that
question
is
to
something.
it.
There's no question to it. No, but also that was expected of them.
Mm-hmm.
The community would tell them, hey, you need to have kids now. Why aren't you having kids? Why don't you have children? So and they would say, no, listen to what this person is telling you. Have kids. So I thought, to me, that's odd.
Mm-hmm.
I find it odd. I think they're looking at more of the longer term. Like, why aren't you guys having kids? But I think when it comes to certain goals and certain ways of life and living, and depending on the couples and how they want to live their life, right? I realized that they were expected to have children the following year after they got married. In today's world, the newer people who are born in or either they're born here or they are raised here, it's very difficult. They don't live off of their parents. They don't live in the same house. Even if they do, they have their own goals and values and norms. So for that, it's a different system. So it becomes very challenging. So in America, a son or a daughter needs to be able to have a home of themselves. If they don't have a house for themselves, they're not. That's kind of a failure here. That's what it's considered in America. If you don't have a house for yourself, you're considered a failure. because you're living off of somebody else's expenses, even if it's your parents. But that's the mindset that people use here. And so for that, there's different. Do you guys understand? It's a different culture here. So you have to understand. You have to wire yourself in a way where you're not fully doing something that's outside of the norm of your community, but also you're doing it in a way where you're able to adjust yourself to the system that is built here in America.
Sure.
So people don't realize that.
Yeah.
And people, so this is where it becomes a little challenging. And I have a harder time with some of the seniors and older elders that I talk to, and I always tell them, like, listen, try this. When you have a child, when you have a daughter or a son, quit telling them, no, you can't go you can't get an education in a different state. Just because they hear things, they always think and internalize things and say that, these things can happen to my kids. Well, if you raise them right, if you had a stronger iman, no, this, your daughter or your son will not do something that would be harmful to themselves or to you. And then the other thing they don't realize is that once a child hits a certain age, they get punished for those sins after death. So it becomes very problematic in that sense. But again, we want to come in and kind of help the community.
Yeah.
I think I'm going beyond.
Yeah, I'll give you a break.
I'm going beyond further. I think I'm going beyond further understanding of certain folks. Either I don't understand it or they don't understand it, right? So what we'll do is we'll just give you guys simplest, kind of make it simplistic and also kind of break it down into very simple terms. Of
and maybe kind of go back a little bit because you went really far. So,
so
backtrack a little bit.
If I talk too much, I usually go in, but I always explain things in different forms and shapes.
Sure.
For individuals to my goal is always to ensure that people are healthy and how to really get themselves motivated and how to become honestly successful in that terms.
Right. So we'll backtrack a little bit and we'll talk about, since the topic of today is premarital counseling, I think something that we can start off with is, hey, premarital counseling doesn't really exist in our community. If you think about it, even with research, when we look at that, we don't see a lot of individuals, imams, in mosques saying, hey, come in like 2 months before your marriage, before your nikah day, so we can do a few sessions of discussing marriage, discussing, the differences between you guys, whether in personalities and family styles and values, right? It's like premarital counseling is not a theme that exists in the community currently.
So what I've heard when I've spoken to some of the imams, they do bring the family or the couples together. For like a session or two session, but it's really discussing their Islamic rights. They talk about, what are women's rights and what are the men's rights.
Now, when you say that, how consistent is that? And do families usually go through with that? Because what I have seen is a lot of families will say, well, no, we don't need this. Like, everything's fine right now.
Yeah. So I've talked to a couple of the community leaders, and I've told them, you should make this mandatory for families, because you have families getting, couples getting married, and then a year later they're getting divorced. Or you have, even in your practice, you get individuals who've been married for 20 years, 30 years, but they're very unhappy.
Yeah.
So I asked them the question, the first question that I always ask them, and I know this is a deal breaker here, I always tell them, when did you have kids?
Yeah.
I had kids same year or the year after, and I said, that's a mistake, I'm sorry. Like, because the reason why I say that, don't take it in a negative way, but when two people get married, it's just part of marriage. The importance of marriage is that you need to allow yourself and give yourself at least 2 to 5 years to learn to be able to understand each other and to learn about your habits, behaviors, cultures, values, norms. Even if you're from the same culture, you have to learn about different personality styles. This is the right fit for me, or is it not the right fit for me? And then based on that, you sit and then you plan. You got to plan. You got to have, when you have kids, you got to have, your wife and husband, they need to know what are the values like for that child now.
So, and something that we tend to discuss a lot in therapy and with, individuals who are single, we tend to try and give them advice. And we always say that marriage is a contract. When you enter a marriage, you're entering a contract where you agree on the different roles you guys are going to play, the kind of lifestyle you're going to live, where you're going to live, who's going to be in charge of finances. You're literally creating a contract and indicating and highlighting what each one of you will give into this contract, into this relationship, right? And so something that we have seen is whether, families are going to imams and having these premarital premarital sessions about, through the faith perspective, what are the roles of the wife and the husband? What is the purpose of marriage? There's a gap in discussion around almost normalizing problems that will arise. I think a lot of couples who do intermarriage, the problems that are going to arise because, you're putting two people who have different personalities together, they're going to have bumps down the road because they're getting to know each other. And so that normalization of those bumps usually doesn't happen, right? And so some of the topics that we have seen arise in counseling post-marriage is seeing problems arise in regards to finances, roles, living situations, whether the girl has to move or the husband has to move. Are they living with the families? Are they living alone? Are they continuing to go to school? Is the family expecting both of the kids to stop going to school and just working? Family values, communication style. So these are a few topics that we will go into more detail one by one. But we do want to start off kind of be pre-marriage and discuss even the courtship phase of, how do you meet the individual and what is that process like? Because what we have seen in research, especially a research that was conducted recently by Iman Dadras and Manijay Danishpur, is what they did was they actually went into the community and talked to a lot of Muslims who are both married and divorced, and they discussed, what had happened in your marriage that you felt like was positive and was negative. And what they found was that the courtship phase was very short. And so what we mean by the courtship phase is how long the two partners are having time to get to know each other before actually getting married. So this could be the time of the families going khazgari, getting to know the family. Is it 2 to 3 sessions? Are, the spouses being allowed to sit in the same room to talk to one another? Are they only talking for 10 minutes? How deep is that discussion before the topic of marriage is brought up and the nikah is completed? So let's kind of start off there because I think that's a really important section to start with. Sure?
Yeah.
Okay, so what we have seen in the courtship phase again is that it's usually really short. I think what I have heard with the Afghan culture is for the Khazgari stage, you should go at least 3 times before the girl's family says a yes or a no, right? That's like a cultural thing there. What I have seen also is usually the family is always involved, right? So the kids are allowed to talk to one another, but they don't get too much time. They probably get like 10 to 15 minutes to just say, what are you interested in? What are your hobbies? Do you agree to this marriage? Things like that, like conversations that are very surface level and are not too deep.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of pressure of being able to provide the proper answers in order for the whole relationship, and not even the relationship, but that courtship phase to go the correct way.
Yeah.
Especially sitting in a room in front of so many relatives and parents. It's uncomfortable, right?
I mean, that's a very, it's an exciting moment in a person's, an individual's life, but at the same time, it's very difficult for the two couples to really bind together.
And it would be interesting to see if there was like kind of an adjustment to that. So what if a sibling or one close member was able to just kind of go outside with these two individuals, right? And not sit in front of the whole family and have a discussion, but like one individual or two individuals max who could go outside and sit like close to the couple while they get to really know each other and have maybe conversations that they wouldn't have inside the home in front of all the relatives.
I mean, certain families, they do allow that to take place. So if somebody goes out, they'll send a brother or sister with them as a third party. Very few, not all.
Yeah, or even the mothers of both sides.
Yeah, definitely, that does work. So that's a stage. This is a process of marriage. And when I've talked to community leaders, some of the answers that I've gotten, when it comes to premarital counseling, when we talk about premarital counseling, brothers and sisters, I've heard this from actual community members that say, no, if the families fix the marriage, that is it. They don't allow the kids to discuss or talk about their marital rights or what it means to be a husband and wife, because you can be 30, but you're not there, or you're financially not there. That becomes problematic later on. because you're not equipped and taking on those challenges because you have somebody else taking over those challenges, right?
But it sounds like that's very cultural when families decide to do that and say, like, I've said yes and her father had said yes, so the kids don't get to decide. That doesn't, because if you think about it through the deen perspective, right, through an Islamic perspective, the two individuals who are about to get married have the right to say yes or no and get to know each other.
And that in today's topic, and that is true. That is something that
kind of is more cultural, right?
And it's also practiced here.
It is, yeah.
By certain folks, not everybody. I've actually recently, anybody that I've spoken to, they pick the children. So sometimes I've had great.
Even in childhood too, right?
Some people, they do child marriages, or they'll say my child will marry your child
when
as they get
up.
older. But I've had like actual parents who picked the girl, and then the other, the girl side picked the guy. So they matched the couples. But then once they match him, they let them take over the process, right? Sometimes that doesn't happen, and that becomes problematic. But sometimes it works out. So it goes both ways.
And what you're describing to me sounds like arranged marriages, right? Is when the parents kind of go out and pick a spouse for their child based on what they know about their child, right? Because they always say the parent knows the best about who their child is, the personality, their likes and dislikes. So the parent is the best person to choose an individual for their child.
Definitely.
And a lot of arranged marriages do work. We've seen that. I mean, studies have shown that arranged marriages actually work very well, and there's a very low divorce rates
amongst them.
Right, amongst them as well. But there's also a lot, we also have to look at the other side. If we're looking at families who do arranged marriages, what are the cultural values, and are the couples happy or are they not happy? Because if they're not happy but they can't get divorced because divorce brings on shame, we don't know how accurate those statistics are, correct?
Definitely. And I think today's topic is, again, it focuses on the importance of when you have parents choosing a spouse for your children, either it's a guy or a girl, right? Or the guy and the girl getting married. You guys need to come and sit down and do premarital counseling. That's the main idea. Because either both ways, either your parents pick somebody or you choose somebody. There's always a 50% chance where we've seen statistically it's stated that people have either they have very unhappy marriages.
Yeah.
They stay in the marriage because it's because now it's too late. They have children and they feel ashamed that if they divorced, the
community stigma.
This community stigma, nobody would get married to their children.
Yeah.
So these are the
Public
issues
shame.
and the problems that take place. So there's a lot of form of domestic violence that take place. Two people's. I've actually personally realized this. You have two husband and wives living in the same household. They're living in separate beds. You have two couples living together, but they are going out and they're meeting other people while the children know of it. See, like these are problematic stuff.
Because divorce is such a
is such a stigma, right? And we're not here to promote divorce. We're here to say that.
Let's kind of backtrack.
Let's backtrack. Even if what happened in the very beginning time of your guys' earlier stages of marriage that caused this problem.
Yeah.
Why are you guys separating? Why are you guys seeking other people? Because I've seen both husband and wife living in the same household and they're going out with other people.
Right.
And they have kids. So when their children, when they're raised, they have a harder time understanding, and they have a harder time understanding how relationships work. So they also tend to follow the same footsteps.
Right.
So they don't believe in relationships. That's what
I
ends up
agree.
happening.
I've seen that too, and I think that also has a lot to do with attachment styles and growing up in that environment, right? Looking at your family of origin. So, would you like to go kind of bullet by bullet through some of the things that we have seen as problems in early marriages? So, again, as Willie John mentioned earlier, some imams do go into premarital counseling and try to have sessions, but then they're also limited to the amount of, kind of like therapy and counseling they can do because they can do it from a religious perspective.
So I was going to say, they do less. In what I've been told is that they don't want, basically, I've been told that they don't want this to become a barrier for two families to becoming one, or the kids not experiencing marriage. So that's the other thing I've been, it's not, I don't think it's the best answer to give, but I think it does make sense to a point. You don't want to stricken or You don't want to make you don't want to provide strict rules for
Right.
marriage as well.
Well, and that's really true because even with research, we see the same thing. Like the study I mentioned earlier
Yeah.
indicated that a lot, because imams were also approached in Southern California and asked, what is your perspective on premarital counseling? And some imams said, it's such a great idea. We try to incorporate it, but families are in a rush and don't feel like there's a need. So they kind of bypass that. And then other imams indicated, hey, we really don't want to talk about these things because we don't want to turn people away from the idea of marriage.
Yeah.
So what you have said has been even proven in research. But you're right. I think when we have those fears of like we don't want to turn people away from marriage, we're possibly allowing them to enter marriages that are not healthy for them.
Yeah.
One of the first topics that we want to discuss that we've seen a lot coming up in, both research and our professional life when couples come in and talk about it is finances.
Definitely.
So I think that's been a big barrier in getting married and then post-marriage too, because in the Afghan culture, as we already know, we're people who tend to spend a lot of money on weddings and engagements,
you have to
right?
sell your arm and leg in order to get married, basically. It's become pretty chaotic, and even in Afghanistan too. I've noticed that even the costs are high.
Yeah.
Even looking back at our marriage, sometimes I look at it and I say it's pretty ridiculous for the amounts that we pay. But it's
and it's almost become a competition too. Like if you look at some families, we try to outdo one another with parties, weddings, engagements, and I think there's this belief that the amount of money my spouse spends on the wedding and the marriage and everything that comes along with the gifts for families and relatives, that shows to others how much he loves me. Right, I think there's this really strong belief in the community that he spent so much. That's how much he loves her. That's how much the family wants this girl.
Yeah.
And I mean that's not a really correct belief, right? I don't think money has to do anything with the feelings that two individuals have towards each other.
It shouldn't. But for certain families, unfortunately, that is how they were taught. Mm-hmm. So if you're taught that way, you're gonna do that. And for you, that works. If it works for you, good for you.
Right. But then let's still look at the fact of what impact does that have. And I'm going to say the male in the relationship, because I think when we look at marriages, most of the finances actually fall upon the man in the relationship and not the girl, right? Like it's the groom who has to cover the expenses, culturally speaking. But let's talk about that, because I think a lot of folks, whether they're really young and can't afford it or much older and maybe have different opinions about how much they want to spend. What kind of impact does that have on a male?
So it does play a big factor, especially depending on how old you are too, and depending on how much money you've made.
Right.
Because sometimes because when two people get married, the idea here Islamically is that when two people are getting married, you're supposed to get married in a way where everything goes in ease. That there shouldn't be any form of barriers, there shouldn't be a form of challenges where, hey, one party needs to pay the whole thing versus the other. These are our rules. This is how it needs to take place. The wedding needs to take place this way. One of the other bigger issues that have turned a lot of individuals down or families to break away before even the marriage is the amount of mahar that is being put on.
We didn't even go to that. Yes, let's talk about that.
So that's also a big barrier that gets put on individuals, is that this is how much money you need to put in place. So these are these are barriers that we as human beings we create for ourselves, and we cause a lot of damage. From the very beginning stages of our lives, when you put it too high of a price. Again, people that are living in America, if you're a guy or a girl, people work here. Culturally, if you go back in your own country, maybe the girls, the sisters are not working as much. But when you're sitting down and your spouse who's well educated and who's working, they're working. It's not like your daughter or your sisters are not, well educated or well put together. So that becomes a barrier and an issue for both couples, because later on, I've heard and I've seen. And I've personally, when I have clients that come to me, they say, the wives have told me that, now my husband always threatens me, like, I put this much money, I spend this much money. Like they even say you're not worth it. Like that. So as bad as that,
well,
you
and
see,
so what comes
it
up
becomes
for
a
me,
money
right?
challenge.
It becomes a money challenge, and what something that you mentioned earlier was the family involvement, even in the mahr, when there shouldn't be family involvement in the mahr. The mahr is between a girl and a boy, and it's the girl's choice of indicating how much she wants to place on the boy. And I think that's a topic that we don't discuss. Like I will tell you for a fact that growing up, I mean, marriage was not something that was discussed to me growing up. Right? It was like, focus on school, focus on your studies, be good. And then once, I became of marriage age, like spouses were, coming and proposing, and it wasn't until you and
Spouses were proposing.
and not spouses, I mean, prospective spouses.
What are you talking about?
Like people were coming and proposing, but it wasn't until you and I actually entered this relationship and the ball started rolling where I started learning about the components that come along with a marriage, right? So I think mahr is something really important to discuss with the single people, because I don't know if a lot of people have the proper education knowledge about what is mahr, how do you come to the mahr price, the mahr kind of amount, because I think back home it's a we thing, right? The families decide together, and that's not really what our religion says. And I think when families decide, they can increase or decrease, and most of the time they increase that price, and that creates a problem in the future for, like you said, the couple.
It really does. It creates a problem for the couple, but not just that, but it also creates a problem for the girl's family, where I've seen individuals that put a high amount of money on, for their kid, for their daughters. What ended up happening is that husband did not allow his wife to ever see their parents again, or allowed their parents.
He's almost taking out his grudge, right? His resentment.
So not even sometimes, I've seen certain even the husbands where they're not taking. Yeah. So what they've done, it's a grudge, but at the same time they don't even allow the girl's parents to ever come meet me to come in the house anymore, because for them, from the very beginning, that was a deal breaker, right?
Right.
So that's what we want to do. We want to help families ensure, and the couples ensure that, when you get into a marriage, you want to have two families and two individuals come together in a happy way,
right?
In a healthy way.
And so what you said is actually really important, because if the guy in that relationship already feels like, okay, I'm going to pay this price, or I'm going to say yes to this price, but then after this, I'm never going to allow her to see her family, that decision's already creating problems, right? So those are red flags that sometimes we need to call out when we see those and discuss them. The other kind of component of this was, before we went to the mahr price, was my kind of question to you about, what is it like for a groom to be told that you have to spend at least $30,000 to $50,000 on a wedding, and then additional gifts and additional other costs, because that's a really large amount. And I think that's kind of like, looking at the current kind of atmosphere and environment, I've seen most couples spend about that much on their weddings. Definitely. And so why have such large weddings, and what kind of impact does that place on the couple and their future, and just on the man? Like, I'm actually kind of curious to know your perspective, since you work with more men in your own practice. What has it been like for them to be able to either come up with this amount or feel the pressure of spending this much?
So I think dealing with a lot of the men here in America, and when it comes to marriage, everyone's happy first and foremost, right?
Right. It's a honeymoon stage, right?
It's a honeymoon stage. So the family's excited, the guy's excited, the girl's excited, the family's excited. I think in that excitement, once the money's spent, it starts hitting reality for the guy. So for the guy, when because he knows he has to pay for expenses. So in doing that, it's easier if you allow the man to spend the amount that he has and he feels comfortable spending. Because sometimes, it either be the family or even the girl pushing the guy, no, I want this. I want a bigger ring. I want this kind of dress. I don't want it from a well-branded name company versus, something that's not as branded, right? Those become problematic. So you have to remember, even when you get married, you have to understand that, especially from a guy's point of view, and that I've spoken to, they're okay with paying.
Yeah.
They've said as long as they let us pay the way we want to pay, it's easier.
So what does that mean, the way we want to pay?
Because that saves them money later afterwards, so they can at least go out, let's say on their honeymoon. At least they have enough money to create a little home for themselves,
Right.
because there's also
So
expenses.
would you say
other
like
expenses too.
something that would be really good to do in premarital counseling is discuss budgeting, even if it is for weddings or
Absolutely.
post marriage?
Because after post marriage, you need to spend money on a home, a newer home, for those that have financial means. For those that don't have financial means, or if they've decided to live, like let's say with the in-laws, it's easier transition there financially for them.
Sure.
But if not, if let's say if certain families are okay with allowing their kids to have their own home, they're allowing their kids to have that experience of marriage by themselves. So
Sure.
especially those first couple of years of marriage is very important for the husband and wife to get to know each other.
Get to know each other.
And that's why then they need to have finances
Sure.
to be able to sustain that.
And I think the other aspect of finances is discussing before even getting married in that premarital stage of, hey, are you okay with me working? Am I okay with you working? What kind of hours are we going to be working? Our schedules, are we ever going to see each other? Our schedules, like me working at night and you working during the day. And I think really honing in, because what I've seen a lot with, the women in my own like professional work is a lot of women say like, hey, I'm a nurse and these are my working hours, and my husband is really upset about it and it's causing a lot of problems in our relationship because these aren't topics that were discussed earlier on. Some families expect a girl to just kind of give up her education and her professional work and just take up the role of being just a full-time wife or daughter-in-law. So discussing finances in terms of that, of what is our future finances going to look like? Who's going to work? How many hours are we going to work? How many hours do we need to work to survive and make it?
Absolutely. Yeah,
ahead.
again, those are important questions to ask yourself, because traditionally back home, women, they work within the household, right? They work as mothers, stay-home mothers. They take care of their household. They take care of the kids' behaviors. They work on their behaviors. They ensure that the family is united and they're and everybody's fed and everybody's taken care of. That's what a mother does, right? When it comes to in America, in the U.S., you have a lot of sisters, a lot of wives and mothers who are educated. They went to school for years and years.
Yeah.
So they're not looking to sit at home all day long. And in America, you don't have. It's not like for us. It's not Afghanistan where I go out and I have fellow Afghans who I can speak to. So people here become depressed. That's the other thing, right? So nobody wants to stay home. Staying home, there's so much time, especially in a country where it's so advanced. You want to better yourself. You want to do things that are good for you, for your family, for your community, and even also for your identity as an Afghan-American eventually.
And looking, the other component of that also is, when we look at living in the U.S. and specifically living in California, it's not cheap to live in California. A lot of people are moving out of California because of the expenses. So it's also looking at, both of the partners need to work? Can one partner work and pay the rent and pay the car insurance and pay all the bills, or is that impractical? Is that partner becoming burnt out, stressed out? Is it impacting their health? So even looking at that, because like you said, back home, people live together, people already own property, and so finances are still there, but they're not as excessive as they are here. And then there's some families here who live on housing, right, and on Section 8, and so they think, it's not a problem, it's not expensive. But these couples who do get married and then move out and have their own finances, both partners do end up needing to work to be able to pay all the bills and have a decent life.
Absolutely. And then I was doing a research and I saw an article that said people in California, they need to have an income of at least $150,000 to $200,000 a year in order to have a sustainable. So they said you got to have a happy. You can have in order to have a happier life. I don't believe in the happier part, but in having a well-being, having a healthy life for yourself.
Yeah,
you do need to have strong finances, especially in Southern California or up in Northern California or in New York. We're a very fast-paced economy system that we have here, and in order to pay for finances, both husband and a wife needs to work, right?
Right. Then and even health insurance.
Health insurance too, right? It also. Health insurance. That's perfect. Even yesterday we were sitting down, Lamba John and I, we were going through our health insurance. We pay about $600 a month just for health
Yeah.
insurance, and that's $600 just for health insurance, and that becomes, these are things that you have to take into consideration. We're not on Medi-Cal, so where we get governmental aid. We have to work, and that's the choice we made for ourselves. Is we were going to work hard. Certain people that depending on where they live, even in California, if you live by the coastal area, you got to work hard. If you live somewhere that's
Expenses
a
are
little bit a little bit far down,
Yes.
away from the main city, it's cheaper and it's easier in certain areas, right? Because you're able to make ends meet for that, or
Sure.
if you're willing to sacrifice the commute but get a bigger home. Like those are things you have to take into consideration in marriage,
Yeah.
and how you want to
Yeah.
proceed in it.
So the other topic that comes up a lot when I work with couples after they get married, 6 years into their marriage or 2 years into their marriage, and that we've also seen in research, is the roles. So something that I've seen a lot of couples come in and talk about is these unexpected roles that they were expected to play. So I've heard a lot of girls come in and talk about, like, I thought I was just going to be a wife, and it was just going to be me and my husband, and I would just have to, do it 50-50. Like, sometimes I would do things, sometimes he would do things, which is also a modern way of thinking as well. We have to take a look at that. The cultural values are a bit different of thinking 50% of type of work, of sometimes all wash the dishes, sometimes whole wash the dishes, right? And so I hear women coming in and talking about, these are the roles I thought I was going to have, and then eventually I was going to become a mother, and that would be a role I would play. But my family, my in-laws that I entered to are so social, and I realized that there's higher expectations of me, and those expectations were never discussed with me. And so I entered something that I wasn't aware of, and I constantly made mistakes according to my in-laws and according to my husband, and I always felt punished for it. And then same thing with husbands, kind of talking about their roles, like feeling like, I thought this is what my role as a husband would look like based off of, kind of watching my dad be a husband to my mom and how he behaved. And my wife expects something completely different, and she becomes upset because I don't, conduct myself in those ways. But I don't know how. Like, these are unexpected roles, and we never talked about them.
Yeah, and this is a good point. Good point. So roles are very important, brothers and sisters. Just like Lamba John stated, right? Growing up, when you look at your parents, especially, like I said again, traditionally, if you have parents or anybody who's 45 and over, usually that migrated to America, there's a specific role that have already been embedded in the identity of your parent or the people in your life, or either be your in-laws, because traditionally, the husband goes to work and the wife stays home.
Yeah.
So they are wired that way.
Sure.
So even back home, when they got married, that's how the system worked for them, right?
Right.
So the young, even for us, like let's say for us, the younger generation, or you have folks that are here, we have husband and wife working. So what ends up happening here is like there's that gap distance, that generational gap differences where the older, our parents don't realize that, yes, we do work, they work too. But the idea here is that, especially when it comes to some of the sisters, is that the sisters work outside of the house, and they're working full time. So by the time they get home, they're tired. That's something, where certain mothers or mother-in-laws don't understand. So they'll say, well, no, I work at home too. What is this? I do this and that. But they don't realize that there's outside responsibilities, or there's also responsibilities of going to school. Certain sisters, they go to school full time. So these are differential challenges that people don't understand. But for the younger generation, let me just finish up there. Younger generation, we always say it's important when you come for a premarital counseling. And I think one of the brothers has a question too, Brother Aziz-Hanifzai. We'll get to your question as well. It's a good question. But we always say when you come to premarital counseling, you want to sit and you want to talk about what are the roles, what are certain what are you doing at the moment, as the guy, what is the guy doing, what is the girl doing, what responsibilities do you guys have currently, and how can we put it together so you guys can go forward with it.
Well, and kind of, I like what you're saying, but then even backtracking, going to the premarital stage of how do we discuss roles, right? And how do we even discuss our own upbringing? Because what you mentioned was a really good example of having a two-parent home. But what if one spouse comes from a two-parent home and the other spouse comes from a single-parent home? The roles that they learn in those homes are going to look much, much different. If a son grows up in a home where there's no father, his role might look much, much different. His expectations of himself might look different. If a girl grows up in a home that has no father and only has a mother, she might show and portray, characteristics that are a bit more dominant, that are a bit more, even confident in a way, because she was kind of taught to be both a man and a woman and not depend on anyone because she grew up without a father, right?
Definitely.
So how do we, and I don't know if we even want to role play and do this, but kind of showing people how to discuss roles in that premarital stage of, hey, like, let's talk about how I want to live my life after we get married and how I see myself behaving, and let's talk about how you see yourself behaving and what you expect out of me. And have a conversation about those roles, those expectations, so that way when we do enter this marriage and months pass by, neither one of us are kind of surprised and feeling either angry, shocked, or upset about the expectations that are there for us.
Yeah.
And then after we're done having this conversation, opening it up to the parents and the in-laws and saying, hey, this is what we discussed. Let's now talk about me as a daughter-in-law, like what to my mother-in-law, my father-in-law, what are my expectations of you guys? What are my, boundaries? And then what are your expectations of me? Like, do I need to come to every little, party, even if it's like a neighbor coming over? Do you expect me to be there, or do you only expect me to be there for large gatherings? Any kind of thing that could come up where there's an expectation of you to be there, but you're not aware of that.
Sure. Yeah.
Right? And so how do we discuss that in that premarital stage of roles? What are future roles?
So here, it does become very challenging because, again, it's a time,
because it doesn't happen.
A moment. This is what I'll tell, especially the younger generation, right? When they see somebody, you get very flattered with the opposite gender, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you're a guy, you see a girl, you're like, oh yeah, this is I found the I found the person.
The one.
I found the one. Or if you're a girl, you say I found the guy. So here, one of the things that we realized is that you're in a stage of lust and you have a lot of emotions that are built within you. So you guys aren't thinking clearly. So that's why when we bring you in for premarital counseling, we're bringing you in because this is part of reality now.
Yeah,
This is where things
talk.
are going to hit the fence for you guys, and you guys need to discuss and and talk about these matters, because this is a long-term relationship. This is not just a 1 day or 2 day thing. So when we bring even individuals in, what we have realized, even when what I've understood certain times, even during our counseling sessions with couples, they've told me that we've had slight conversation, what would be our roles or what we would do, but later it changed. It didn't fall through with what they agreed on upon too. So we also get couples that talk about, we agreed upon these things, but this one partner is not willing to do it anymore.
Right.
So that can happen.
That's a really good point.
So you have to understand, when you guys come into a marriage, it's a contract. A lot of people think it's you come in a marriage, it's just two people getting together. Even when two people get together, that's why we say give it a couple of year period of time for the two individuals to understand each other. Because unless you don't have a child, there's not an actual, the two couple or the two family has not binded together yet. A marriage binds individuals together, but in order to be called a family, you need a child. That's I mean,
the definition of
the definition of family. So people don't understand that in order to take those steps, you have to remember, and that's the period of time where you get to realize too that, okay, let's talk about, because within the 5 years, the husband or the wife would say, you know what, I'm not doing this anymore, and that can give you certain time in order, to take a different path.
Sure.
It's like marriage is basically, it's a road, right? It's a straight road. Sometimes one couple is like, the husband or the wife's like, I can't go in the straight road, I need to take a different road. And that happens. So don't feel that, people think they're stuck at times in marriages, but we want to ensure that you really don't have to be, but you have to make compromisations. That's what happens. So the moment when two people get married, you have to compromise. That's what it is. It's a contract deal. You have to. It's like doing a business deal.
Sure.
It's just that it's wrong to say, but in reality, that's how it is. That's what you do. You go in a way where you and your spouse sit down and you talk about what is it that we want in this marriage.
Right.
That's what
And
we
then
got.
also including, again, that premarital stage, not only doing it between you and your future spouse, but then also opening up the conversation to the in-laws and the parents and the relatives that are, in that context of being involved in the courtship phase. Because what we have seen is sometimes, like you said, Willie John, the two individuals will agree, and then they get married, and then there's such a big shock to the families because they feel like, wait, why are you acting this certain way as a son-in-law, or why are you acting such a way as a daughter-in-law? And it's because they weren't included in those conversations, right? So again, the expectations are there and they're not being met, and then it makes people upset, and then it causes conflict in the relationship.
Definitely.
And that kind of takes us to our next topic, which is the living situations. And this is a really big topic, and we only do have half an hour, so we won't go too much into it. We've had, multiple couples come up to us at conferences and workshops and ask us to talk about living with the in-laws, and we will definitely have a show just focusing with living with the in-laws. So, just kind of saying that because I know sometimes this topic comes up and, it can turn into like 24 hours. So we'll keep it brief on this one. But what we mean by living situations is in that premarital stage discussing, does each partner, what are their expectations after getting married? Do they want to live alone for the rest of their lives? Do they want to live alone for a set amount of period,
time,
right? Like 2 to 3 years or whatever years they agree on. And then after that move in with either the guy's parents or the girl's parents. What happens if one side of the parents gets sick and they didn't want to live with the parents? What is the backup plan to that? And kind of talking about all of those expectations that both partners have of each other and coming to agreement on that, and then sharing that again with the parents. And Willie John, I don't know if you want to say more about that.
Yeah, so here, one of the challenges that people, this is actually probably one of the biggest aspect of marriage is the living situation, right? And it's not just even living situation amongst the families, it's also living situation amongst living in the same community.
Okay.
So there's times, people, when they get married, or they can find a job somewhere. Like I've seen people who have a job like 2 hours away, let's say from here to San Diego.
Which I did.
Which you did, right? But and then let's say if you're commuting for the rest of your life, that's on you. Like you can live there, you can live there and get a place there. But there's certain folks, who stay still close to, let's say, they have a family, they have their parents, their siblings who are elders, and then they get a job, let's say in LA, and they're up in San Diego. They still come back all the way back to San Diego in 2 hour drive. You don't have to make that. You don't have to make it hard on yourself. You just move. But then people, the community also looks down upon that individual, especially for the guy, and says you moved. Just because you moved because you got married. That's what happened,
right?
And then they'll consider you being a girl too. So these are things that.
And that's something that has actually if you're okay with this, but has happened, to us, where I have been shamed for that, for continuing to commute to San Diego post marriage, and not living with my in-laws at that time because I was continuing to go to school in San Diego, and I think as a community, people were like, no, you're married, you need to quit school, you need to quit your job, even if you're like a year away from graduating, right?
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of shame on me for that, of you're not a good daughter-in-law. And so
in order to put it, to piggyback on that, and I think what helps and what has helped even myself, even as a guy, once you get, so I didn't realize this till actually I moved out, because you and I.
Because we came from two different places. I came from San Diego.
Places. She got from San Diego.
I was in
Los Angeles. So before getting married 6 months prior, I finished and I got a job in Orange County. So I moved to Orange County. And then we got married 6 months after, and then you moved. But then you were still commuting because you were in school and you were working. Even in that, before when I was, which I realized, which is actually pretty funny when I hear some of the community, when I was with my parents or close to them, people would always say things to them. Now that I have my own place, they'll come directly and tell me, which is good. Which is
good things or bad things?
No, good thing or bad things, which is good for me because that actually helps me understand you know that as a man, you need to hear these things because you're not you're not being protected by anybody. Now you have to protect yourself. So which is a good thing. I actually like that. And it's important that, especially what has worked for us, and I think that's been very good, is that especially with families. So yeah, it's not the parents. Like, when it comes to parents, like I talk to my parents every day. So it's usually, if the parents are good in these situations, there's a problem that comes, I think, with our personal issue that I've realized, and also in the community. And I have certain individuals.
Creates a problem.
So the community will create a problem.
Yeah.
They'll tell your parents, like, oh, this is what happened, this is what goes on, and this becomes a problem, right? So this is where you have to tell yourself, like, listen, you're a human being. As long as you're happy with your family, the community is going to say stuff.
Yeah. You
don't want to disregard things in a way where it becomes problematic, but you have to have an actual healthy boundaries amongst them. So I think for us, I think part of it is so easy is because, my family's supportive. My parents are supportive. They believe in us living separately. And for me, to become a man, and to have my own household and to be able to
stand on your own 2 feet
stand on my own feet without getting assistance, without living, in the same household as my parents, where they're paying half the rent, my mom is doing the cooking. No, my parents want me to go out and do actual living. They want me to live, and they want me to pay the bills. They want me to go to the house and make sure that I'm doing housework. So that they're
to appreciate.
For us, it's the way we have to say. Certain families, they have to start from zero. And that's how we've done it. In certain families, they don't get that chance. But then there's also benefits of living with your parents. Because there's times where, when you're tired,
right.
And then when you go home, there's, things are ready. Let's say if you're tired of a job and you're like, I want to quit my job. But if you go back, if you're living with your in-laws or with your family, then you have that support.
Financial
security. So there's always a two-way street, depending on whatever works best for you. You take that alternative,
right.
Brothers and sisters. You take that.
And I really love that, you're discussing kind of what goes under the factors of living with the in-laws, and kind of starting off with the positive and saying what you said, like, as a couple, if you are busy with work, if you are busy with school, your in-laws understand that, your parents understand that, so they will, the things you can't get done, they'll get done for you. So if you're unable to, like, I've had times where I've been so sick because I've been so stressed, and I've had in-laws help me out, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's, preparing me a meal or helping me out with the laundry or something like that, right? So they'll come in and they'll support you in that way. If finances become stressful, they'll come and they'll support you in those moments, right? And so living with the in-laws actually could be very, both financially and emotionally and physically and spiritually, good for you. And so I'm really glad that we started off with that, but then also looking at the other side, because we've also, most of the time when we have couples coming into our rooms and talking about their problems, we usually hear more of the negative, right? So living with the in-laws, we hear, and most of the time, I don't know what your experience has been, but I've heard more of the negative from the wife, and then the husband kind of feeling like stuck in the middle. Yeah. And so what I have heard is, boundaries. Like, I feel like the wife's telling me that they feel like, their voice doesn't matter in the house, that it's basically her mother-in-law and her father-in-law dictating what she should do.
So here,
well, let me list a few of the things, and then we can jump into it. Feeling like there's no privacy, like for the sisters who do wear the hijab and have, like their in-laws and the other, like, brother-in-laws in the home, feeling like, I'm not comfortable wearing, like, my hijab, or, maybe just not wearing my abaya in the house. And then others I've heard talk about, there's always so many events going on at the house, and I constantly feel like I need to help out, and I can't focus on other areas of my life. I can't relax. It's just, there's no comfort. And I'm not getting to know my husband very well, because whenever problems arise, he kind of gets on their side, and I feel alone. So those are some of the things I have heard. I don't know if there's additional things that you have seen in your own therapy with couples that we can combine together and then kind of discuss all of them. Yeah.
So all the things that you suggested, there's two things, or three things. Number one, I can tell you from certain families or people that are watching this, and they'll say, we don't care.
Families?
Yeah, whatever you say right now, they don't care. Right. And I'm telling you this because I know this. I'm a man. I know this. People, as men, I mean, I have my own way of thinking. There's certain things people don't care.
But
That's just a part
the
of it.
sad reality is when people say that, they're not understanding that they're pushing that woman to leave that marriage.
And, yes, and that's,
Because
that
that's
is true.
when I have couples coming in and there's an I don't care factor, that partner has one foot already outside the relationship, and I think she brings in her partner into therapy to make it a good way to end the relationship and leave the relationship.
And
And,
that
I think a
and
lot
that
of
has
families
happened.
are
That-
not realizing that the impact they have.
Okay, and that has happened.
Yeah.
But I'm saying that there's a couple of things that I'm telling you and how people think and families think. Number one is they don't care
Okay.
what you say. Either you like it or you don't. That's it. Either you stay or you leave.
Yeah.
That's how it works. Number two, in order, the suggestions that you give, I think one of the problems here becomes like, you can live in the same household with your in-laws. It's not a problem. The problem is the son. The son doesn't have the willpower to tell his parents that I'm married and this is things are different now. So this is where the problem becomes. And I've come across, and I see there's a lot of my friends too that I talk to. We're actually starting to get married, but they're starting to get some advice from me. From me, they always tell me, "Hey man, how's marriage? How do I do this? How do I do this?" Even though they're much older, but they haven't gotten married, right? And the simplest thing I always tell him, I always say, the best thing that worked for me is honesty. Talk to your parents. Be honest. You're a grown man now. So the other thing is that a lot of men in the household, they feel kind of trapped and they feel like they can't say no to their parents or they can't talk to their parents because the way they were raised or they didn't get the
That's a
option.
really good point.
They didn't get the option to talk to their parents, in a conversation. So this is another factor.
So what I heard you say is families say they don't care.
Yeah.
The husband should be
and the husband either they don't care either or they don't have the will to speak up
So
or stand up for the
families
wife.
say they don't care.
Yeah.
The husband should be the one who should be kind of standing up and
That's
changing
the-
the dynamics of the home.
That's the easiest way if they want a healthier
and
relationship.
sometimes the husband's saying no, and so I kind of want to touch bases on the first one and the last one that you mentioned, because those are the two that stood out to me. So it's great when the husband can kind of dictate the dynamics of the relationship within the home and create respect, almost is what I'm hearing you say, where the husband can't stand up for his wife and tell his parents, hey, like, she has so much going on, you can't be, like, she's not a maid, almost, right? A lot of times we hear, like, I'm being treated like a maid, and the husband standing up and saying, she's not a maid, do not treat my wife as a maid, and then kind of going vice versa and telling the wife, these are my parents, you need to respect them. And Islamically, as a woman, you're not obligated to do what your in-laws tell you to do. You're obligated to do the things your parents tell you to do, but not your in-laws. But you should still respect them within the process of that, right? And so it's really great when you have a husband who can kind of be like almost like the moderator, the referee between the two. But what do you do when the family doesn't care, or when the husband when the husband feels like he doesn't have a voice either?
So that's why it's important to have a premarital counseling.
Good.
That's
Thank
the
you.
answer to the question. You gotta have premarital counseling because there's two things. Listen, there's guys who get married but they don't have a voice within the household. So
And they might not even be
when we
aware of
say
it yet, right?
They're probably not aware of it either. So the idea here is that, when you get married, you have to understand now you have your own separate. You get separated from your parents. You have a wife now. You have to take into consideration that, and everything changes within the dynamic of the house. So it's kind of hard because even parents, they have a harder time understanding that, or even the son has a harder time understanding that, right? But sometimes even the daughter-in-law also needs to be able to understand that. So when you come to premarital counseling, we psycho-educate you on the importance of, hey, dynamics are going to change. There's going to be a new person coming in. How do you work on this? How do you work together?
And something I've heard a lot with families is, the son-in-law or the daughter-in-law will adjust, right? There's this expectation of, just give it time, they'll adjust. But the reality is sometimes they never adjust.
So the other thing is they don't adjust because they're not a good fit for each other.
Right.
And it's just commonly okay. You don't
Because
have
the
to be
spouses
fit.
could be a good fit, but sometimes you can see that the son-in-law is not a good fit for the family-in-law, and the daughter-in-law is not a good fit for the mother-father-in-law, but
True.
the spouses get along very well.
And that happens too. So then you have to also, the husband and wife have to take into consideration so you have to take in, listen, You can't always have everything in life.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Right.
what it is. You got to make sacrifices.
Mm-hmm.
You know, depending on how those sacrifices are made, right? Every stage of your life, as you get older too, you hit a stage where you start to get treated differently. You start to have different expectation. You have different roles with your parents, with your wife.
Mm-hmm.
You know, once you have kids, you have different roles. That's just part of, you know, life.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so that's number one. And number two is that we've also heard, you know, and we have experienced, even like, for instance, daughter-in-laws who say they will live with the son-in-law after 2-3 years.
Son-in-law?
And with the
Parents-in-law?
parent, yeah,
Uh-huh.
the son's parents, like their in-laws. But then what happens after 2 years, they don't.
Mm-hmm.
And now the son is outside, and then the daughter-in-law doesn't want to come inside the household, which is also becomes problematic because, again,
Yeah.
when you get into marriage, that's why when you come in, we always sit down and we go over these things like, you know, finances, roles, living situation, and then we'll go ahead and talk about the
And
next one as well.
I think what Willie John just mentioned is really important because I think when you decide on the kind of roles and living situations you want to have just between you and your partner and you don't involve the family, you might have almost unrealistic expectations of the future, right?
Yeah.
Because you don't really know your future in-laws very well. And so sometimes, like an example that Willie John brought up right now made me think of a case that I'm currently working with. And this couple, kind of similar to Willie John, you know, they fell in love. It wasn't an arranged marriage. They fell in love. They got married, and they had decided to live on their own for the first 5 years of the relationship, and then wait to have a kid and then move in with the in-laws. But they never discussed that with their in-laws. Their in-laws had different expectations that after marriage they're going to move in all together. So when husband and wife say no, that's number one shock to the in-laws. And then when they start having arguments and disagreements, there goes the daughter-in-law saying, nope, I'm never going to live with them, because now she knows who they are and they know who she is. They're understanding each other's personalities and they're not mixing well together.
Absolutely.
So in the premarital stage, we will bring in everyone and discuss these personality traits. Are you compatible as a spouse, as a husband and wife? Are you compatible as a family? And again, expectations that everyone has in the relationship, so that way when after you get married, there's nothing being said of, oh, had I known you were this way, I would have never allowed you to marry my daughter, or I've never would have let you come into my family.
Definitely.
Right?
And I think we can go on to the next one.
Next one. Again, we'll have a longer topic, a longer show on this topic, because we do, I mean, honestly, Willie John, every time we have a presentation, I have girls coming up to me and saying, can you please talk about this topic? I don't know what to do. So
I get the same
in
thing
the
because
future,
I have a lot of brothers who
Also.
who struggle in mediating. One of the brothers actually commented, Islam.
What did he say?
He actually had a good comment. But
Thank
he
you
said,
for watching us.
He said that a son has to be the mediator. He needs to have a spine to stand up for your wife and have a heart to listen to your parents. Without these, a man would have never been ready to be married in the first place, which is true. No matter how old you get, but if you cannot stand up for you, so here, this is where the problem becomes for me. If you have a spouse, right? If you can't even stand up for yourself, you can never stand up for your spouse. And so that becomes problematic because now you're taking into consideration another human being, another person in your life. So for that, you need to be able to stand up. And we're not asking families to, or couples to disown, your children or your in-laws.
Yeah.
This is a problem that has been created here in America where we're trying to help the families understand that, listen, when marriage takes place, you have to sit down because marriage is a bind contract. Nobody understands that, and I hear a lot of people tell me, no, once you get married, you're done. And that's it, right? No, you're not. The marriage is a contract, bro. You have to understand, Islamically, it's a contract. A lot of people don't understand that, so I have to always say it is a contract. They look at me, they think I'm out of my mind. and I look at them and I say, listen, I'm getting my PhD and I do my my studies in these topics, and I also consult with a lot of the imams who have PhDs and their doctorates. Like, Do you not
we work
understand?
with people who come in and talk
Who
about
come in
this.
about these, right? But then again, coming to your original question and what you were talking to, discussing, like, these are the roles, these are this, and I said these are certain folks that do not care,
Yeah.
and they're never gonna care, and that is okay. It's like one of those situations. Aside from this, is in relationship wise, is that whenever there's a situation amongst the husband and wife, especially the newly families that come from Iraq, Afghanistan, or different countries. Whenever I remember, I would notice that there was a problem, or somebody would say, "Hey, there's a conflict between the husband and wife." So I would approach the husband and wife and I say, "Hey, do you guys want to come in for counseling services?" No, everything is okay. The wife would want to come. The husband does not want to come. And then a month or two later, I realized that their child is taken away. The wife either left the house, and now he is forced by the government to come and seek therapy and parenting classes because he wasn't fully equipped. So we're here to help you guys. We're not here to talk down upon you guys. And this is and we're discussing it based on healthy experiences and healthy relationships. Because it's very different. And as we said again, life is much different in America. So our topic for today is just for those individuals living in America. So this is not for anybody that living in Afghanistan or in different countries, because scenarios are different, cultures are different, values are different. In America, we have sisters and wives and mothers who are working, so the dynamics become very different. So please remember, this even if you're an Afghan, if you're from back home, if you're watching, this doesn't pertain to you. So don't take this into consideration, because it's not.
But it's good to know, right, about the struggles that your fellow sisters and brothers are facing outside of the home country. So something else, as I'm looking down on kind of the bullet points, that goes under the bigger umbrella of being religious, right? Religiosity. So levels of how religious are you and how religious is your partner, and this it could make it or break it, right?
Definitely.
So it's very true that if you're more religious and your partner is not, maybe you can influence them, enlighten them, create hope for them to reach that level at which you are at already, and start praying 5 times a day and visit the masjid and fast. But it also could break the relationship, and this is something I've heard so much with the couples I work with, where one spouse and it's not just man or woman. I've actually seen it both and man and woman. Sometimes I have man coming in and saying, like, I pray 5 times a day. I try to wake up my wife and she won't wake up. She won't fast. When I'm fasting, she won't even show me respect by, not eating in front of me and things like that. And that really impacts a relationship, and then impacts the kids in the future and causes a lot of problems.
Yeah.
And she dresses like her clothing is too short, and that's against my deen. It makes me uncomfortable. And then I've seen it also the opposite way, where wives feel like my husband is not following my faith. Like, whenever I try to pray, he gets angry, he gets upset. When I turn off music, he gets angry, he gets upset. He goes and he talks to women. He sits, he goes to gatherings where there's a lot of single women, and there's drinking and there's smoking. So if your guys' levels of religion and where you're at and the deen don't match, that's a topic to talk about in that premarital stage as well.
Definitely.
Because so much can fall under that: values, traditions, clothing, social gatherings. What kind of social gatherings you'll go to? Are you going to concerts, or are you going to the majlis?
So what I'm gonna piggyback and talk about now is all of these things are very important and very crucial. And over here, we have to understand that one of the biggest key component of this situation is who you hang out with. There's people who actually get married. They get married. Either it be guys. I know guys who get married, but then they're still going out late night. They're hanging out. Their spouses are at home, either by themselves or they're with his parents. It's like, what are you doing? You got married now. You're a married man. You have to spend time with your wife. But to them, they're still that bachelor young guy
mindset.
Again, it's that mindset, but it's also because the way they were raised, they don't feel that their wife is their fully responsibility. So that's where they fall. And this is where that relationship becomes problematic for them, because they don't realize that once you get married, life changes. There's people that I know who have and that I've seen who are in their 40s, 50s, and they're still hanging out. They're still going out, you know,
Without their spouses.
Without their spouses. They don't take their kids anywhere, which is, you know, it becomes very problematic just by looking at that. Because tomorrow, when you have your child and your child is older, that is how they're gonna think. They're gonna think that when I get married, I'm just a stay-at-home mother. When I get married, you know, your son is gonna just leave the wife at home and he's just gonna go out and hang out and party late night, 1 a.m., 2 a.m., while your wife is, you know, your poor parents are either taking care of them or they're calling you, hey, can you come home? Your wife is lonely. And I've heard this from families.
Yeah.
Parents say, we call our kids to tell them, can you please come? Like, you're married now. But they don't understand that.
I've seen it even myself. I think, you know, we've even been to these, you know, events and weddings where we see two individuals getting married, and then through social media we always see one partner always out and about, traveling, going to places, you know, even clubbing and doing different things without their spouse. And we're always like, what's going on? What's happening? Like, it feels like they got married, but like you said, they're still in that bachelorhood state of mind.
They didn't get married. They got married, but they didn't get married to someone that they wanted to get married.
Or they didn't get married for the right reasons.
So
honestly,
that's
it almost feels like that too, where it's like, what was the reason you got married? Is it because like you're in the right state of mind and you know what a marriage is and you respect the phenomenon of marriage, or are you getting married because, you know, you are lusting and you need those needs met, and that's all, and now you have that woman or that male to meet those needs, and you're just keeping them at home and continuing to do the things you're doing. So again, looking at religion, so your understanding of marriage and where you guys are at culturally and religiously, because that can break a marriage if one partner is constantly looking down upon the other about their prayers, their fastings, their clothing. Like, that can really impact the marriage in a very negative way.
It definitely can.
So another one, and I'm so sad to say that we only have 6 minutes left, but another one that's actually also really big is communication styles. And what I mean by that is how were both individuals raised, and how did they learn the kind of communication styles that they are then going to present in their own relationship, right? So kind of going back to my example of single parenthood homes versus, you know,
both parents,
two parent homes, right? So for example, if you grow up in a single parent home, and let's say you are a woman who grows up without a father, well, you might feel like growing up you need to be stronger, you need to be more dominant, you need to stand up for yourself, you need to protect yourself, because you don't have that male, you know, individual in your family to do that for you. And so if you get married into a home, let's say that's into a relationship with a spouse who's also very dominant, that communication style might look really odd to him, because he might feel like, whoa, that's not her role. She's not supposed to be so dominant and make the decisions and make the choices.
No, I don't think it's a dominant problem.
What do you think it is?
I think it's the lack of interaction or the lack of understanding of, like, you know, if a guy is told, you know, once you get married, you know, this is what you should do. If you're hearing this from men, and like, you know, once you have a spouse, this is what they can do to you. This is what they can do to your family. That stays in the back of their head, and they'll start to protect themselves in doing certain things and acting in certain ways.
So would you say it's a protective factor?
It's a protective factor.
Okay.
It's the same thing for the wives and for the sisters. When they don't have a male figure in the house, they don't have full connection with that man, so they don't know how all men are, or how do you effectively communicate with a man. So in hearing things, you start, you know, acting out in certain ways or in different forms to protect yourself. That's what you're doing. It's not, because you can have two dominant people living in one house. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just, I think it's a form of interactions that you have against the other party.
I'm going to have to disagree with you, because what I have seen, especially, you know, in the society that we live in, and I think majority of societies are very patriarchal, right? And so something that I have seen is it's usually the man who makes the decisions, and they like to make the decisions and the choices. And so what I've seen in my own professional work is I have a lot of couples coming in and arguing about the woman feeling like, you know, when I make a decision or a choice to do something, he becomes so upset. Or he will say himself, like, I don't know why she's trying to dictate the choices and the decisions in this relationship. She should just place that on me and trust me to do that. And so that communication style of, you know, what is kind of the intention behind that communication? Because
again,
I think
safety.
the intention's not looked at.
It's safety.
Yeah.
It's protection again. So when individuals come for counseling services or premarital counseling services, so when it comes to communication styles, we always talk to our clients. I mean, our individuals, and we say, when you are making decisions, like let's say if it's decision making, it's either you and your spouse, you know, you sit together and you make a certain decision, or you can take the other option is that there's certain decisions that the wife makes and there's certain decisions that the man makes. I've had couples that have a very good, happy marriage. The wife is dominant, and I know by hearing and talking to them, but they always tell me, they say, I have the decisions, anything that is within the household. Any decisions that are made amongst the children in the house, that's with me. Anything that's out of...
So it's almost like a teamwork.
It's a teamwork. It's a teamwork, but you have to talk. The two party needs to understand communicate. And then she said, and I know she's a dominant person because I've sat them down and I've done counseling with them, and things went really well with them. Alhamdulillah. But she tells me, she says, my what is it called? My wife takes decisions. You know, I take decisions at home. And on my children, anything that's related to education, outside work. You know, where to send our kids to school. You know, decisions based off of, you know, where we should live, my husband makes it. And I'm okay with it. So again, it's
they found a balance.
They found a balance, but at the same time, it's not dominance. It's protective factor. They feel you want to feel safe.
Correct.
That's what you want to do, right?
But then we also can't ignore the fact that majority of couples who come into therapy come in saying we have communication problems, right? So what do they mean by that? Because I'm gonna have to say 98% of couples who come into therapy and I ask them, why are you here? Oh, because we have communication problems.
They do have, because they don't listen to one another.
Good.
That's the only
and
thing.
So that's what I meant by intention. So when we're communicating with one another, what is our intention and how is that intention coming across? Are we checking in our assumptions when our partner's communicating to us? Or are we listening to our own inner voice that is ready to respond and protect ourselves, which you were talking about protection, right? Because in order to have a healthy communication, what we need to do is, one, feel safe, two, be able to kind of hush that inner voice and really be present and listen to our partner and be reflective. This is what you're saying. I see. I'm hearing you say that, you know, this is how this is making you feel, and kind of having this dance back and forth where you're making your partner feel understood, and then at the right moment also indicating how that's making you feel or how that's impacting you as well. And couples who are rushed through this process of marriage and don't get to know each other's personality and compatibility will not know how to communicate that to each other. And so we're seeing a lot of communication problems in the earlier stage of marriage. You know, they say that between 0 to 4 years of the marriage, that's where all the problems occur. And then after that 4 years, usually it kind of stabilizes.
Definitely.
So I know we are up on time. And while we would love to go more and more into detail about what other things we have seen as problems that arise in marriage that could be discussed in premarital counseling, I feel like we do have to wrap it up here. So some of the things, kind of reviewing what we talked about, was some of the topics that we talked about that have arisen in marital problems are finances, roles, deciding whether to live with the in-laws or by themselves, levels of religiosity, and communication styles.
Perfect.
Anything else you want to add, Wali John?
No, not at the moment. Maybe we can continue this conversation at another time, because again, this is an important topic. That's why we picked it. When it comes to marriage, you know, you can work marriage. You know, no matter who you are. You know, when it comes, but no matter who you are, marriage works. Marriage works if you know how to work it. You know, it doesn't have to be, you know, a lot of people think when you get married in the West, you have to think, you know, Western. No, you don't. You can still think traditionally, but both party needs to come together and abide by those rules. If they don't, then again, then you don't have to get married. That's as simple as that. So understand that, brothers and sisters. That's not the issue. I give that perfect example of that. The wife who is dominant and the guy who wasn't. But she still goes and respects the husband's
wishes
of
and way
him
life.
being the man and making those decisions, certain decisions that she probably wants. I know she doesn't want to make those decisions, and then at the same time, the husband respects his wife's decision, and knowing that she's the dominant one, but they're good, they're happy. So that's why it's important to have these conversations, because we're seeing constantly, a lot of couples coming to us after seminars, programs, and asking us, how can we make this work? Or they're coming to us saying that, we're very depressed, we're on medication. A lot of the sisters mainly, right?
Yeah.
The brothers kind of have it a little easier because they have their whole family with them.
Or sometimes they're not even displaying it, right?
They're not
'Cause
displaying
there's shame
it,
around being
or
depressed for men.
and the other, they're not displaying it, or what ends up happening is that they just comes to that point where it goes from one ear and comes out from the other. So these are the factors to it. But other than that, inshallah, we'll see you guys next week again, and that is all.
That's all for today. Thank you so much for watching us. Again, we're live every Sunday at 11 a.m. And we hope to see you guys next time, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum.